Good afternoon. We're going to be starting very shortly, so please, with the distinguished panelists, please take their seats, and we'll start this lovely event.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Rontani, Father Bill Rontani. I'm Episcopal, priest in charge at St. Paul's in Oroville, and I'm a member of the North State Ecumenical Conference, past president, and serving on the North State Ecumenical Conference has been one of the true blessings for me. Not just because of the work, but just meeting and making friends and being in touch with such a wonderful community of members of the Christian church. And Jesus said he goes before us, and we meet him in Galilee. I think every time we really, truly meet one another in the name of the Lord, it's almost experiencing the presence of the risen Lord, is it not? And I wanted to say something nice about our panel leader. And I asked her, LaTaunya, what can I say that's nice about you? And she was so busy getting ready to lead. I could say the nicest thing about her is if you have an opportunity to meet her personally, just look into her eyes. And through her eyes, you can see her heart. And again, the risen presence of our Lord. It's a great honor to introduce her to you, who is going to introduce you to the panel. And I didn't see the agenda. Is there a place for an opening prayer? Yes, good.
I'm Pastor Frank Espegren, one of the pastors here at St. John's Lutheran Church. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you here. And we're really excited for this panel, for dinner, for the worship service later this evening. And let's start out with a word of prayer. Holy One, we thank you for this opportunity to live into the oneness that you give us as followers of your Son, Jesus. Help us to be open to understand others and to find our commonalities and to understand each other better, and where we are different, may we see that as distinguishing features that just embellish the work that you are doing in this world. Thank you for this sibling state you provide us with through Jesus, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen.
Thank you. My name is LaTaunya Bynum, and I am the regional minister for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of Northern California, Nevada. Not a lot of people know who we are, but I will tell you there are 4 disciples congregations here in Sacramento, and so find one of them. They're good people in every one of them. I want to introduce our panel members. Molly Sheahan. Is it Sheahan? And I don't know what MTS stands for, so would you just say a little bit about what you do as I introduce you? Yeah.
Thank you. So I am the Associate Director for Healthy Families for the California Catholic Conference. MTS stands for Master of Theological Studies,
okay,
so I've studied theology. But I'm a lobbyist for the Catholic bishops in California.
Great, thank you. Next, we have President Tim Talley of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
How are y'all? I preside over 6 congregations located in the North Natomas area, Del Paso Heights, and Foothills. So in that area, we have about 3,000 or so members, and we try to do the work of the Lord there.
Good, thank you. Regina Banks, Director of the Lutheran Office of Public Policy in California.
My name is Regina Banks, and I'm the director of the Lutheran Office of Public Policy, California, where it is my role to lead the over 350 congregations of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America in the state of California in their advocacy witness to love our neighbors in public policy.
Thank you. Pastor Brendan Campbell, the California Baptist Church. Oh, it's not here? So it'll be like Elijah, just be Pastor Ivan Herman.
Good afternoon. I'm Ivan, and I've been serving for the last 15 years as the associate pastor at Carmichael Presbyterian Church. So if you drive down Marconi and you're almost at Fair Oaks Boulevard, that is my neck of the woods.
And Deacon Anthony, is it Preschetti? Thank you. Thank you. A former assembly member and a deacon in the Catholic Church.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Deacon Anthony Peschetti. I've been a deacon 15 years in the Diocese of Sacramento, and I'm assigned to Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And before that, I was an elected member to the California State Legislature.
Great. Thank you. So I have just a very brief opening statement, and then I have 4 questions that I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask them one at a time and invite our panelists to respond to them and perhaps respond to each other. And then if we have time, we'll certainly invite those of you who are watching us up here to ask any questions that you have. So we celebrate the week of prayer for Christian unity, and at the same time understand that among our communions, opinions vary about the role of the church in terms of how it addresses issues of public policy, and maybe even have some disagreement about what a public policy issue is. Nevertheless, the church has a word to say about how public policy impacts citizens of our state, of our country, and the world. We often hear people who speak for the church speak for it in ways that to some ears are harsh, mean, judgmental, and unloving. They give rise to the assumption that all Christians are like the least gracious among us, or that all Christians conflate faith with a particular political affiliation. But I like what Walter Brueggemann says about the role of the church, about the prophetic tasks of the church, and he lists 3. To tell the truth in a society that lives with illusion. To grieve in a society that practices denial. To express hope in a society that lives in despair. And so we are invited today to consider the story of the Good Samaritan, the story that Jesus told in response to a question of who is my neighbor. And we hear that story of the Good Samaritan, and I think understand that it's about compassion and risk. So these are the questions. Whoever feels like answering first can go. What is the church's role in shaping public policy? And it's a 2-part question, actually. I should have told you that. And what are the values we bring? And by we, I mean all of us as communities of faith. What are the values we bring to the public policy arena?
So I'd like to fill out that question, reimagine that question as what is the church's role in creating public people, right? It is the people that show up in the halls of justice and in rooms where decisions are being made. And I shouldn't have to tell you I'm a Christian when I get there. You should hear from my compassion. You should understand from my witness, from my courage to speak up for my neighbor that she's got some kind of faith whatsoever. And then when we talk about it later, you can not be surprised that it's Christian. But part of the role, perhaps the most important role of our churches, is to form faith in such a way that it sees its role as being in the public square. The biggest obstacle that I run into in my congregations, and again, I work for the ELCA, I work for Lutheran congregations, very, very faithful people who I have to remind and help shape and help them understand that they have not been shaped to be good people for themselves alone, but for the community. And in all of the places where you show up, including the PTA and including the neighborhood association and including church, and yes, including the ballot box and the state house and the city council, those are places where you should embody that Christianity, not necessarily saying the words Christian.
I agree with what you just said. I think the other part is we have to show compassion to those that may disagree with us. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is the lack of respect for someone's opinion. And I believe we as a church should show by examples. We should show how we accept everyone. And as Jesus once said, he loves everyone, no matter what they think, where they stand. He did with the tax collector. And I think that's one of the things we as a church need to show. As a former legislator, that's probably the hardest thing to do, is to sit in the chambers and vote on an issue that you know goes against your Christian faith, but yet respect those that present it is even harder. So I agree, and I think compassion and respect are two key factors.
I can add a little more just from the Catholic perspective. So I work for the Catholic Conference. That means I work on behalf of the California bishops as a lobbyist, and that extends to the Catholic community, which is about 12 million folks in California. We've got about 250,000 students in Catholic school, more than 1,000 churches. So there's a lot of folks that come from every background and every perspective, every socioeconomic status, very diverse population. And so looking on behalf of all of these people, what does it look like to build a world as God sees it, right? That's really the question that I think we bring into the legislature as Christians. How do we build a world as God sees it? And that includes a particular focus on the poor and vulnerable, right? Making sure that we lift up those that are most at risk. It also means inviting those that are on the sidelines into the conversation. Folks that are waiting, may have been on the margins, but are waiting in the wings to actually be invited to play in the game. So, you know, that can extend to a lot of ways, and I'm sure we can talk about that later. But that's where this concept of solidarity and subsidiarity comes in. This concept of building up the common good, right? And lastly, I'll say, I think we also bring the perspective of seeing every single person as beloved by God, made in the Imago Dei. We carry that into our work, and that each person comes from a family, and that we can support, by supporting families as the building block of society, we're able to bring that into a corporatized world and say, this is who we need to be uplifting. We need to be nurturing our families and supporting them to be able to thrive in our great state.
Those of you who are lobbyists, maybe let you answer this question. First, our advocates. How is it that we participate in political processes without being partisan? Is that even possible?
Is it possible? Anything is possible in politics, which is sad. But yes, I mean, I manage lobbyists across the country. And the one thing that I emphasize is it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. It's understanding their role and their position and respecting that. It's a challenge because a lot of times one party takes a different position than the other, which may be contrary to yours, but you have to respect their position. And if you work against their position, you do it with respect and you do it with courtesy, and you let them know this is your position. But It's a challenge, but yes, you can and you should work across party lines. Party affiliation shouldn't matter.
When I was in seminary, early 2000s, I was in Washington, D.C., and I had the chance to do, I think, probably some of the work that Regina's doing some public policy advocacy. And I worked with the Presbyterian office on public witness for a year as part of my seminary education, how to engage a life of faith in a way that makes an impact with policy and policy making. And I still have to tell that story as a part of my history, and I run into people who say, what is a person of faith doing on Capitol Hill? Right? What were you doing? How in the world were you able to do that kind of lobbying? And I said, well, now wait a minute. Advocacy work and lobbying work are different. Lobbyists come with a briefcase full of cash. Right? Lobbyists come with the ability to give to a campaign to support a particular candidate. When I was there, just before I started working on the Hill, Senator, I think it was Paul Simon of Minnesota, who was a great man of faith. Sorry? Illinois, thank you. My friend who worked for him was from Minnesota. That was my difference there. Great man of faith, and he would say publicly that he would get back into a room after a campaign event, he'd have 20 phone calls on his answering machine. 19 of them were for folks who had advocacy and who had issues that they wanted him to address, and one of them was someone who had donated $1,000 to his campaign. And at midnight, who was he going to pick up the phone and call first? It was the person who was able to engage the financial incentive to support his campaign. Well, that makes it difficult for those of us in the world of faith because we are not carrying a briefcase full of cash in to support our advocacy work. At least I never did. I don't know. No. We're not donating to support a political campaign or a particular issue, usually, with any kind of cash. What we bring is a moral voice. What we bring is a particular passion for an issue, for a people. And as we do our advocacy work, one of the things I believe that we as people of faith must do is quite often work against our self-interests and to advocate for those whose voices are being left out of the conversation.
Can I just?
Yes.
I want to take a little bit different spin. Sure. Because advocacy or lobbying doesn't always mean money. As a former legislator, what meant more to me is my constituents talking to me. And I believe as Christians, the best way, excluding giving political contributions, is to work with the community of elected officials and meeting with them as a community. You get more attention if 10 people from my district came and talked to me than you if you gave me $2,500. Because at the end of the day, I need to convince those 10 people to vote for me the next election. So I think as we talk about advocacy and lobbying, yes, you're right. The lobbyists spend money, whether it's a PAC or through their clients. But advocacy, we all have the opportunity in numbers to make an impact. The challenge we have is how do we use that effectively? And when do we use that? That's the challenge.
Really briefly, when I first took this role 5 years ago, I was offered the position. They said, will you take it? We want you to be here. And I had two non-negotiables. The first was that I wanted an opportunity to see the Holy Land. We've got partners that are there. And I got a chance to see it last year. It's a good thing I did because it's not the same now. And also, I refused to register as a lobbyist. At the time that I'm having the conversation with the person that then became my boss, I was already a registered lobbyist. I have no problem with lobbyists. Some of my best friends are lobbyists. But that's not the way I wanted to work. What I had found was that people who employ a lobbyist, it had been in my experience that people that employ a lobbyist also Chuck give off the idea that all of the relationships are held with the lobbyist. The lobbyist goes in and has conversations with legislators and staff and everyone else, and we just send our girl on the hill, our guy on the hill, and they have those conversations. I was unwilling to do that for the church. Our greatest strength is that we can hold these local conversations, hold these local relationships. When I lead our AIQ, which is every Wednesday, we have our lobbyists that are our advocates that come and hear what we have to say about what's going on in the legislature and then the things that they can do to help move the needle. Their homework is always invite your assembly member, invite your senator to church. Bring them to your community. Let that start this conversation. When they come for lobby day on Wednesday, May 15th, for those of you in the room, when you go in and meet with the legislative staff, pray with them and invite them to church. I may not convince you on the 3 bills we're talking about today, but over the course of the 12 years that you're going to be in the legislature, let's build a relationship. And you can't always do that in other avenues and for other kinds of employers. And again, I have no enmity towards registered lobbyists. I have been one. I may end up one in the future. I'm just saying that in this space with our faith-based advocates, it's really the relationship that makes us different from Greenpeace or from ExxonMobil or anybody else.
I think back to the question, what's the church's role in shaping public policy? And the position that our church has consistently taken on political issues has been to kind of step back and let members decide for themselves, according to the dictates of their conscience, how to participate in the political process. And so when I think about the church's role, what strikes me as being particularly important is that as members of our congregation come and as they're invited to exercise their faith and live according to the dictates of their conscience, when they participate in the political process, although people can differ, people of the same faith can differ on various political issues as far as what the right or wrong thing to do might be, as people stick to their values and as they practice the principles that they're taught in the context of their faith, those values will come out in their participation in the political process. I mean, that will, I think, generally move the tide where through the political process, members or the public in general can arrive at a solution that tends to support and promote the public good.
So I'm confused by my own question here. So I'll ask the second part of it. The first question really just had to do with, and I didn't word it very well, had to do with how we counter what we hear described as Christian nationalism. That the United States is an exceptional country, and we can all agree about that, and might agree about that for different reasons. That God kind of gave the United States to the world, that God gave Christianity to the world, which God did, but God gave Christianity to America, and our job's to spread a kind of particular brand of Christianity out and about. So that was my question. You can tackle the question of Christian nationalism if you choose to, and my apologies for wording that badly. But in terms of the story of the Good Samaritan, I guess my question is, what do we say to those who see a real need, the need of unsheltered people, the need of people who don't have adequate health care, schools that are underfunded and so at a disadvantage in terms of preparing students for what's next in their lives? You can name 5 or 6 other things as well. What do we say to people who see that need, but thinking in terms of the story of the Good Samaritan, who see the need, it's right there, laying in front of them, and they choose to pass by on the other side? So maybe what's the word to those who are, at least right now, seem indifferent or afraid? Or the need to help is not worth the risk?
I'm going to begin to answer that by going back to the previous question about whether or not we can do this work in a way that isn't partisan. I find that we have a particular brand of operating in this country that separates church and state. We've held that up as a requirement. Not every nation around the world uses that kind of language or operates in such a way. And I think we as a church have often, and all kinds of churches and all communities of faith are limited in how we can engage because of some of the tax repercussions of 501c3s and engaging particularly with a campaign for a particular person running as a candidate for office. Engagement with other issues and propositions can be engaged in a different way. But I also, I think about a particular time I was preaching a sermon. At the end of the sermon, left church, and I found a note in my box. You know, the notes you never really want to get, the one that's anonymous. And it said, "Pastor Ivan, I wish you would tell both sides." And I went, okay. And I went back over the sermon, and I couldn't actually figure out where it was that I was alienating someone or a point of view. And I kept pondering that question. And at the middle of the week, I went, I am not a reporter. I don't tell both sides of a story. That's not part of the job description. My job description is to speak the gospel. And the gospel is partisan. It takes a side. It takes the side of the poor. It takes the side of those who are pushed to the margins. It takes the side of those who are in need. So the gospel is going to have a way of engaging with the world that is partisan. That doesn't necessarily mean it aligns with a political party. But there is a point of view that isn't all encompassing. So when we get to a question of Christian nationalism, I have yet to meet someone who isn't a Christian, at least in name, who supports this idea that we are a Christian nation. And not just a Christian nation, but one which ought to enforce a particular religious point of view. So for those who would pass by on the other side, I think part of our role as people of faith is to be disturbers, to stick our thumb in the side and say, hey, pay attention, so that those who are passing by on the other side, whether willingly or out of ignorance, are starting to pay attention. And what our role ought to be is to lift up those voices that are being ignored. And I think I've already spoken to that to a degree. But lift up those voices and create space for those who are being forgotten, those who are unhoused, don't have a voice, at least financially, where they can purchase their way into a home or a place of safety. So part of our role as people of faith is to lift up voices other than our own, which is a very different kind of engagement with the world of politics, where we are often so engaged with our own self-interest. I mean, every special interest group you can think of advocates for their own particular point of view, where I think part of the calling of faith in church is to advocate for someone else's. Makes us a unique body, to advocate for others who are stuck on those margins. So that's part of our calling and part of our challenge as people of faith.
Yes, I'm thinking about the question with the story of the Good Samaritan and who is our neighbor. And I really appreciate what Pastor Ivan just shared. And I think as I'm thinking about building on that, our culture is very materialistic, it's very Gnostic, it's very nihilist, it's very apathetic. And so I'm trying to think, why are people on the sidelines, right? Why are the folks that you know on the sidelines? What's keeping them, out of the polls? What's keeping them at home? What's keeping them away from talking to their neighbor who is unhoused? What's keeping them there? And I think a lot of it is the apathy, a lot of it is tiredness. Sometimes in my role, I have worked on grassroots advocacy or working with volunteers. And with volunteers, you gotta go and act as a coach, right? And let them know, like, hey, you're cared about. Like, I'm so glad you're here. I want you to come back. And what you do matters, right? And I think very often for Christians, Pastor Ivan's right, like the gospel does call us to take a side. But in our culture, because we're so divided, we're divided from ourselves, from our bodies, we're divided from our families because of just cultural pressures, because of politics. With all of those different divides, and we know it, our neighborhoods, we're losing the sense of place, right? With all of that pressure, it becomes very difficult to step outside of ourselves. All of that is teaching us not to do that. So if we're to be disruptors, as Pastor Ivan said, I think part of our call is to let people know, remind them of who Jesus was as a healer. Remind them that he calls us to heal the brokenness in our families, the brokenness in our communities, that the story of the Good Samaritan is for us, and that we have the capacity to do something about it. I think that's what I notice most for folks is they're concerned, I can't do anything about this. This person is not for me. Like I genuinely don't have the capacity. So it's showing folks what is actually doable, what is possible. My favorite example is I was an intern in the U.S. Senate a number of years ago, and so I was the person that got all of the phone calls for that senator. And if you want to know, like the phone calls, some of them would come in. I'd check the voicemails, and some would come in the middle of the night. And people were very angry. I was there during the government shutdown, and people were just furious. And I was just a little intern answering the phone, and I'm like, they're like, you're the reason my family can't eat. I'm like, I'm sorry, man, that's rough. But what I remember is helping people to understand, like, I literally am writing down every single thing that you're saying, no matter where you are in this state. I am passing it on, and the senator is actually going to look at the list of what people called on. We're going to send you a response. So when it comes to advocacy, this is my way of saying, when it comes to advocacy, helping people to understand that when you do reach out, it does make a difference. It does actually have an impact, far more than anything else that you can do. Because the fact that I was there to answer the phone taught me, okay, this actually does have an impact. It's part of what made me want to be a lobbyist in the first place. Because I was on the other side of the desk. I was the one receiving those phone calls. And I'm like, I want to help people to be able to frame their answers in a way that makes a difference. So if we're able to bridge that gap between the desire to be good Samaritans and the apathy that we're not going to make a difference, we can help people to fulfill the desire of their heart, which is to do good and to build up the common good and to build up the kingdom of God in our society.
I'm going to try to say this without getting fired. I want to associate myself with all of the statements that have been made about this question. The original question implicated Christian nationalism, and I'm going to narrow in even further on the ideology of white Christian nationalism, which is a sin, it is an evil, it is real, and that sin is consuming the energy of Christians who would otherwise be working for the Good Samaritan. And inherent in that ideology is a kind of magical thinking that says that once we identify as Christians, the work has been done. I don't have to go out and vote even. Well, vote, they understand. But I don't have to make a relationship with my unhoused neighbors. I don't have to volunteer at the local food bank. I don't have to do anything for anyone because I am the Christian, and when Christ comes back, it will all be taken care of anyway. And in the meantime, I'm on the winning side. That is real. And for those of us who identify in the Christian movement, identify themselves as a follower of Christ, one of the things inherent in that identity is pushing back against that corruption of our faith in every avenue, in every place where we have an opportunity to do that. Because that, more than any policy made in any state house, is what is preventing the best that we can do together. Everybody carrying the Christian banner is not embodying the Christian principles, and some of them quite decidedly so. So I tried, you guys saw me, I tried really hard not to say that, but it just needs to be said.
You said it so perfectly well. So perfectly well. What's sad is there are so many people that are struggling today. Just look at the thousands that are homeless, those that are kids and families that are living out of cars that can't put food on the table, children that are not getting qualified or quality education or health care or housing, whatever. And yet, you're right. What are we doing? We're fighting those issues and ignoring them, when in reality, we should be working with them. The undocumented, we should be helping instead of challenging. And going back to a question earlier about the partisanship, that's where you see it the most, which is sad, because Christian politicians forget their core value, what their faith is based on. And you have too many people that are saying, well, God doesn't exist, so we should take it off the dollar, off the Pledge of Allegiance, or wherever. And yet we as Christians forget what our faith really means and what we should be doing with our faith. And that's helping those that are marginalized, those that can't help themselves. And we need to do a better job in getting that message out, because that's important for all of us.
Thank you. So can we agree, is there any common understanding on what we mean when we say the common good?
So I don't have an answer to that question, but I'll try anyway. I think where we could probably start to answer that question is it requires everybody to try to put themselves in the position of another person. It's often the case that it's very easy to become kind of self-centered and focused on the issues that are in front of you only. And in this day and age, for a lot of people, regardless of your life circumstances, there are lots of issues that you encounter that you have to put a lot of work in to resolve. But in the press of life and in the press of trying to overcome and solve and resolve those issues, we often overlook the problems that other people are facing. So I think the first step in trying to answer that question is everybody just needs to try to understand the problems that other people are facing, that their neighbors are facing. Neighbors, broadly speaking, those who are unhoused, those who are facing poverty, whatever the challenge may be. If we're better able to put ourselves into the shoes of another person and understand the challenges that they face, that's going to allow us to act a bit more compassionately towards those individuals and the issues that they're facing.
So the question my bonus question is this. How do we make this difference? And those of you who are advocates can can help us? Practically speaking, how do we help the congregations that we work with, the places that we worship? The church word for it is mission or outreach. But how do we help members of our congregations who have sometimes very complicated lives, who are trying to work and hold families together and hold themselves together, who are compassionate, wonderful people? My question is, how do we help them differentiate between or if differentiate's even the right word, doing good works one-on-one to an individual? I see somebody by the side of the road, I'm going to offer them a ride or change their tire or lend them my phone. But there are systemic issues underneath people who are unsheltered and poorly educated and around issues of war and peace and climate change. How do we help people in a practical way kind of understand our connection to, that we are impacted by those systemic issues?
The first thing I would suggest is to remind our congregations that you don't have to do it all, right? So, don't watch the news tonight, see every problem that's going on in the world and say, me or my congregation or my neighborhood has to fix every problem that was demonstrated on the news. You don't have to do that. What you do have to do is have a conversation with your pew mates about what is important to you. Maybe have a conversation during your church council meeting about what is important to that congregation, because I would much rather have a congregation that has a heart and a spirit for the unhoused, and who doesn't know what's going on in climate change work, hasn't thought about public safety, isn't interested in transportation, but this is the thing that animates them. They've had the conversations and they're excited about it, and they will leave those other issues to other congregations who have a heart and spirit for that. And I know the congregations in California, or I'm starting to know very well of the ELCA congregations that really have their hearts on fire for an issue, and it's only ever one, right? When it's what I'm talking about is only ever that one issue, and it does not matter that I bring them a great bill about something that they aren't thinking about, don't care about, not interested. Come talk to us when it's about the unhoused, Regina. Got it. Then I can't stop them. Then they are the best stories. And I take those stories to legislators, and they've told that story in the legislature about congregation XYZ who is doing this thing in their congregation that can be spread throughout the state. You don't have to fix it all. You just have to start those conversations close to you, in your family, in your pew, in your congregation.
I really appreciate what Regina just shared. That makes a lot of sense. And I especially like the concept of mission and, in a particular way, vocation, but writ large for a church community, right? So it's true. A lot of our churches have a particular focus, a particular goal, a particular heart for something. And I think a lot of what we're able to do to invite our neighbors, to invite our churches to get involved, it comes about in four ways. It can begin in prayer. Because the Holy Spirit inspires us to do the work that we do, because the Holy Spirit is the one who is calling into our hearts and inviting us into this mission, it has to begin in prayer. Prayer opens our hearts and changes our hearts. That's the main goal of prayer when we petition the Lord, right? So if prayer is able to work that change in our hearts, then it can also open us up to our neighbor. So it has to start there. The second thing I would say is education. You want to inform people about the two ways that they can get involved, which is through charity, through that direct service work, doing the works of mercy that Christ has called to, right? Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, visit the sick and imprisoned, bury the dead. We need to be doing those things. And then we also have to be working on the systemic issues that the Reverend mentioned, and that is the work of justice. So educating people that you can do both. You can have both charity and justice, and that our work will fail if we only focus on one at the expense of the other, and that Christ calls us to both. So doing that education. The third thing I would say is doing that service. The way that I ultimately got involved in this work, and the way that most people, if you talk to them, get involved in their community, is someone invited them to take a step, to do an activity. They get invited to go to visit a legislator. They got invited to go serve at the food bank. They got invited to go, visit those who are homebound, right? When someone invited them to do that thing, that transformed their heart and said, oh, wow, I can do this. Like, this is doable. This is something that I'm already doing because I'm here with my friend. And suddenly, like, it becomes possible, right? Something that you didn't know you could do becomes possible. So you have to invite people into that service. And then the last thing, the fourth piece, is that advocacy. Because once you've done those, once you've laid that groundwork, you have that prayer that has opened our hearts to this. You have that education of what is possible, charity and justice. And you have that service that has given you that lived experience of what you can do to change the world in a very tangible, real way, something very small, right? Low entry. You bring that meal to the new mom, right? You go serve with, Ronald McDonald House, right? Once you've done those things, inviting people into advocacy makes more sense because they're like, I can do small things. So if I talk to someone, they will listen, and I have a story to share. Something that I have done has made a difference in someone's lives. I've had this personal encounter with Jesus Christ, and I want to share it with others. It opens their heart to be able to do that. So that's the pathway that I've seen work successfully.
In this country, in this state, and in this city, we have unprecedented access to our legislators. Something that's not been seen before our time that we're living in. In the times when I've visited other countries and talked with other people of faith around the world about the issues that they're facing, about the problems that they have, they'll say, well, a lot of this has some sort of connection to the United States. Go back to your legislator, they say, and talk to them because we can't talk to ours. So to go back to one of the first things that Deacon Anthony talked about, it was access is influence. When you have the ear of your legislator, take that ear and speak confidently. And that, I think, is one of the things that we can teach our congregations, teach that as a people of faith, we have a voice, and that voice needs to be shared because it will be heard.
Would you say some more about that? And maybe you can talk about how you help prepare a congregation to speak to the legislature, to speak that truth to power?
You have some experience with this. Yeah, okay.
You go and then I'll follow up.
How many different levels do we have access to? Something as simple as writing a letter. Or calling up the intern like Molly at so that they can listen to the messages at the end of the evening. Emails, phone calls, the different. We've got lots of different kinds of structures in place where we can participate. But I think building partnerships and relationships, both personal and in terms of partnerships between organizations, that really is where a lot of the power and the collective voice comes in. We don't do our work alone. We don't speak our voice alone. And if we can work together as, in your case, the ELCA, the entire denomination's got a voice, those 350 congregations have got a voice that are going to be heard collectively. Working in Washington, D.C., I did not go and say I'm representing Presbyterians. I went and said I'm participating with these other folks who are engaged in issues of peace in Latin America, that are concerned about the U.S.-Mexico border. And it was all of these organizations together working to give a collective voice that had power. But really, a lot of the time, it was those individual conversations, those one-on-one relationships, that invitation to come and speak, that invitation to come and write a letter with me, that makes it's a tipping point that gets people engaged in a new way.
I agree with everything that you said. I think a couple of things to keep in mind, and I'll tell a story. When I was in the legislature, I had a business owner that was quite upset over a business bill. And so they came and talked to me, and they said, "What are we doing wrong?" I said, "How many employees do you have?" And he said, "I have 95 employees." I said, "There are 95 votes to your one." You have to look at it in numbers. To the point you made earlier, is you have to build relationships. It's not easy to build relationships with an elected official. So what you do is you start with their staff, their district staff. Get to know them. Invite them to your parish events. We have a legislative organization within the diocese, and that's what we've done. We've gone and met with staff of elected officials and build that relationship. You invite them to events in your parish, at your church, whether it's a carnival, whether it's a dinner. Ask them to get involved. This way they get to know you and you get to know them. That's how you build the relationship. I will tell you, a standard letter that everybody puts their name on, but it's the same one, doesn't work. You've got to make it personalized. You've got to make it come from your heart, from your belief, from what you think. They have to hear and see your words, because that's what gets their attention. It's possible, and it's possible if it's done right, if the congregation puts people together based on districts, understands what that member's pet projects are, what their strengths, what their weaknesses, find out if they go to church, what church they go to. Use all that for your advantage, and that's how you build those relationships, and that's how you're able to get that message to them.
Well, I'd like to invite you, those of you who have been witness to this conversation, if you have questions that you want to ask.
Thank you for a rich and insightful conversation and a little bit of a spectrum of point of view and issues there. At lunch today, I went to the press club and listened to stories by George Skelton, 60 years a journalist, 50 years with the LA Times. It was interesting, after he talked about Warren Spahn and being a sports reporter, he talked about the death penalty. And I know Lutherans and Catholics and disciples, Presbyterians, I think we're all in sync on our concern about capital punishment. And he talked a lot about Pat Brown and the conversations they had, way back. But getting to your point, Pastor, about truth, grief, and hope, I'm getting more cynical about what's the truth. And George spoke to that today and said he really is grateful that he can work for the LA Times, what's left of it, and what's left of print journalism, so he can take a deep breath and look for the truth. And so my question is, in the accelerating communication environment that we're living in, and deliberate misinformation and distortion as well as disinformation. I went to the governor's prayer breakfast one day and Schwarzenegger said, we need more teachers and nurses. Pastor Scott Sorensen from this church was here, and it was then in the media within 3 hours that we're going to make war on teachers and nurses. And that was before social media. And, Pastor Scott, did you hear that? No, I didn't hear that. I heard we need more teachers and nurses from Arnold, but, some people didn't like him. And it's worse now.
It's interesting you talk about what Governor Schwarzenegger said and what shows up in the papers. I can tell you an experience I had. When I first was elected, I was elected to the SMUD Board of Directors, and I became really good friends with a reporter from the Sacramento Bee. And I used to always say to her, "Is this on or off the record?" And when I told her I wanted it off the record, she followed it as faithfully as you can. She ended up passing away and was replaced. I asked the follow-up reporter the exact same question, and she said, "Yes, I'll recognize and accept off the record." The next day, everything I said showed up in the paper because it sells papers in their mind. So in that particular case, it's easy for them to say there's a war against teachers and nurses because that's going to get people's attention. And the sad thing today, unlike when I was in the legislature, is one thing: social media. Anyone can say anything they want in social media, true, false, right or wrong. They can say what they want. And it's really up to us to make sure that we do the best we can to try to track that and correct it when possible. Not easy. But I was always hesitant when I dealt with the media to make sure that I was very clear, because you knew something was going to change.
Really quickly, when I first started this role, in the first week, my office is right upstairs. In the first week that I started in this role, I put my diploma up on the wall and I moved my family pictures in, and I had to make sure that the cable was set up so that I could watch all 3 news channels the whole day that I was at work and consume that. Then I listened to NPR in the car on the way home, and then I got home and then turned on one of the news channels when I got home, and then I turned that off to go to bed, and then I woke up to one of the radio stations. I mean, it was the 24-hour news cycle lived in my brain mind. During the pandemic, it was too much. I had family members that got sick, and I didn't do that as much because I wasn't here and nobody else was there. And then I realized that I didn't miss it, so I didn't need it. But I still wasn't evangelical about turning it off, right? And then I started working from home, and I had to share that space with other people in my household who were working from home. And so I could watch it sometimes, but I couldn't. And I realized that the time when I went back, I felt worse. So I did an experiment and did an entire news diet. And I didn't watch, I didn't listen. It was painful, it was withdrawal for 2 or 3 months. And I just got happier. And beyond becoming happier, I think I was a better advocate because I wasn't taking in all of the pain and pressure of the world. I was taking on just the pain and pressure of the world that I was in a position to do something about. Those news items found me, or I was able to go look for those news items. I knew where to turn. So to that question, and thank you for it, Mark, take some time. We don't have to live on the 24-hour news cycle. That's their game that they're playing. Think about, even just whatever you hear, think about it until next Sunday and have a conversation with somebody in church about that thing next Sunday. Even taking those 2, 3, 4 days, however many days between now and Sunday, whenever you have this thought, is enough to exhale, let the chemicals flow through your body, relax a little, and come at the issue a little more clear-headed. And those things that are in the news just to inflame us, they've gone. They're gone now. And we can actually just deal with the issue. The fastest thing that happens every year in that building down there is the budget, and that's 144 days, 145 days. Nothing has to be decided tonight.
I'm taking a little bit of a news break now, and so we just watched the Barbie movie yesterday while I did laundry, and I was a happy person. So.
But it also reminds me of somebody asked someone else, what is truth? Right? The question that was asked of Jesus, what is truth? And we do live in a time when we are consuming a lot of media. And how can those of us in the church compete? When media is consumed, when Fox News, CNN, MSNBC is on 6-8 hours a day, and I preach for about 12 minutes. How do I compete with that message of truth? And I don't know. There is no competition. It's just simply, I think what else has power is the power of story. And as we lift up and retell and make space for other people's stories and for our own stories, that's what carries power, is that power of narrative.
I did the best I can to say it shortly. In seminary, a professor I respected and loved was asked in a class by someone, not me, "Do you love God?" And he was silent for a while, and then he said, "Oh, yes." And then it was asked a follow-up question by a student. I don't know who it was from the back of the class. "Why? Why do you love God?" And there was silence, and then he said, "Because he first loved me." I never forgot that. And having said that, I can't help but think of someone named Martin that said, "I have a dream." And so much of his dream, I think, is God's dream, is Jesus' dream. It's where we love and respect one another. It's a challenge today, being a priest and a proclaimer of the gospel, keeping in mind that we love God because God loves us first. I say God loves us first. And God's love can change anyone, like St. Paul. At the same time, when you face your congregation, so many of them are Democrats and so many of them are Republicans. And you turn on CNN or Fox or whatever, and Jesus said, if you call someone a fool, you've murdered them. I'm challenged by the political environment today, where a leading candidate for president of the Republican Party refers to Democrats as vermin. How do you respond to that? And how do you respond as a proclaimer of the gospel to hear that there are Christians, so-called evangelicals, that support him? How? I don't know. I mean, and keeping in mind, God's love is there first for everyone, for all the candidates, for everyone. At the same time, how do you respond, keeping your focus and vision on that dream and on Jesus in today's environment? That's my question.
Bill, I feel all of that and refrain from saying much of it, so thank you for saying so out loud. But I think Sunday I preached at a church, and I didn't use a lectionary because I felt there's a passage in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 that just kind of lives rent-free in my head. That's just always be ready to give an account for the hope that is in you. And I think we have to identify the hope that's in us. The hope that as the panelists have all said so eloquently, the hope that helps us to see that person, to look them in the eye, because that acknowledges that they're a human being like we are, and to let our hope build from that. I was raised by really strong lay people, disciples of Christ's mother, Baptist father, and they just always taught us, you have to just pray for people. You don't know what their experience has been. So when we were being bullied by just some awful neighbor kids, my mother would say, and she meant this in the kindest way possible, those children have probably never been inside a church. And what she meant by that was that they've not been nurtured. Nobody's told them that they are loved for who they are. Nobody's helped them see that this inherent respect that we ought to give to people. I'm not one of those respect has to be earned people. I start with respect. You can lose my respect, but you don't have to earn it. And so I think where's our hope? And then we build from there.
I'm thinking about how you mentioned the Reverend Martin Luther King, and I instantly thought of his concept of the beloved community. You asked, what is a good definition, a common definition of the common good? And I wonder if one definition that could be offered is that definition of the beloved community, one where everyone is seen through the eyes of the Lord, in the image and likeness of God, created in that image, and with a unique dignity that deserves and commands respect, simply because they've been created by God. And when I've been challenged by folks, folks want you to endorse a candidate, right? And the church doesn't endorse candidates, right? We're like, no, we talk about issues and we talk about people. The way that I've always been able to explain it to folks, the way that we usually explain it, is your goal is not to try to be more Republican or more Democrat. Your goal is to help folks understand how to be more Catholic, right? How to be better Christians, how to be better disciples. So if we're being asked, which party is better, or which way to go, or which part of the divide do you lean towards? It's like, no, you're asking the wrong question. How do you be a better Christ follower? How do you love better as Christ loved? And what does that look like? What does that call us to do then when it comes to building a world as God sees it? How do you build a kingdom of God in that light? And the beloved community, or seeking that beloved community, would be one way to go about it.
One of the things that comes to mind is something someone had told me not too long ago, is that as a country, our society has lost faith. We've lost our faith in God. We lost our faith in what we've been taught. People don't come to church anymore like they used to. And that's where, when we talk about politicians, we talk about hypocrites. The evangelical are holier than thou, but yet you listen to their words. It's completely opposite than what faith teaches us. And it's sad.
Thinking of the parable, the so-called Good Samaritan parable, you reference as part of the theme, there's the case that the priest really can't help there because I know it's ritually unclean or the rules don't allow for it, but the person who does show love, who shows mercy, is the Samaritan in the story. And the Samaritan maybe didn't know the rules, had different rules, but they were an outsider from another land, spoke another language. And I'm curious, in your context, worldview right now, of loving the neighbor, who are some Samaritans you might look to or can look to? Who's someone from Samaria that has a very different perspective that can help us to learn how to love?
Young people. 110% young people. So most of the year I'm working in California, and I work on ending childhood poverty and climate justice and housing. A couple of weeks a year, I get the opportunity to attend the UN Climate Change Summit in wherever it is that particular year. This year it was in Dubai. We were there with the faith delegation, and we spent those 2 weeks there. And for the last 2 or 3 cycles, I have followed the young people. I stand on our social teachings and our social messages. I stand as a woman of faith in my own skin. But I ask them, this decision that's being made is going to affect you longer than it's going to affect me. What are you feeling? Have you been consulted? Have you engaged in this issue? Do you understand? I do have some subject matter expertise, so let me tell you about my subject matter expertise. And now that I've explained that, does that resonate with you? Is that an explanation that makes sense to you? Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. And we engage in that conversation, not as Regina, the grown-up, and you, the small child who now needs to live. No, I'm really following. I'm really asking your opinion because in this room I have a vote or a say, and I can not speak for you, but hand you the mic. And I believe that very strongly. The youth are not leaders of the future. They are now. And however we can empower them to see themselves in that way, we will all be better for it.
But I think the other Samaritans for me are people, I don't do it a lot, but I do listen to people I disagree with, politically or theologically. And again, it comes back to that 1 Peter passage, that if I can't in my head make a counter argument, then I need to study some more, or I need to change my mind. And so I think it's those voices. I don't like living, we all are kind of, live in these political and social bubbles, and that's really comfortable. It's not always helpful or healthy. So we need to hear people. So when I was 10 years old, a very long time ago, when I was 10 years old, I watched, I'm old enough that I remember 3 networks, maybe a PBS station, some independent stations. I grew up in Southern California, so had maybe a few more than some other places around the country. But our parents sat us on the floor, my 2 sisters and I, and we watched both the Republican and Democratic national political conventions. And I have done that every 4 years since, because I'm fascinated by it, by how people make decisions, about how a narrative, even a false narrative, and Lord knows we've seen a lot of those, can just sort of take hold, and then it becomes what we think of as truth when it's demonstrably false, but people will still say, but no, your facts don't matter, because we don't agree on facts or truth much in these days. And so I think just listening to people with whom you disagree, I could probably do more of it than I do, but that helps me to form helps me to understand better why I believe or why I think as I do. And I, in my role as a regional minister, I visit different churches every Sunday, just about. And I just assume that half the people in that congregation vote like I do and half don't. But I have to be present to all of them. And that sounds like horrible virtue signaling, and that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to say is that we have to, I talk about hope and I talk about encouragement, and I raise questions. I'm going to get in my car and go home Sunday afternoon. So I think it's important to name in spaces like this that, what Regina just said, racism is real. And it's evil. Misogyny is real, and it's evil. We refuse to listen to young people at our own peril. So I think that you have to raise those issues and what is the common good? And I ask that question because these are people who work in political arenas and faith communities. And so thank you. I just was very interested in how you all would answer that question, because that little, Venn diagram is where that little center is where the common good is. However it is we get there. Because surely we believe that good education, good quality education, shouldn't depend on a zip code, on a person's zip code. That everybody is due decent, life-sustaining health care. That people shouldn't be forced to be unhoused because rent is so ridiculously high. So if we can agree on those things, we'll figure the rest of it out, I think. But what are those things that we can agree on? So that's ended the lesson, and so.
This has been inspiring. In my role, I work to help 5 different congregations interact with the outside community, and I see some things I need to change in how I do that. In particular, I know that I need to create more stories of my own that I can share to inspire them and their participation. But I want to bring up something that is a constant refrain, and I feel it myself, and that is the fact that so many people experience in their own lives so much difficulty. I keep hearing over and over from my priesthood leadership, from the people in the system above me who send me more stories of difficulty, from the food bank directors I work with. There's more and more and more need everywhere, and maybe you could somehow give me a little more hope and how I approach people who are already feeling stretched thin and try to encourage them to reach outside of themselves.
I'm thinking back to something that Regina said earlier, which is acknowledging and noting the gifts that people have and affirming the congregation, what the congregation is able to do. I think you can also look at what people are feeling called by the Holy Spirit to do, what they feel they most are able to do. So that would be the first thing, is, asking people to pray and see if they have space to be able to respond. And that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing, I think, is looking for the willing. You're not going to be able to get everyone on board with what you're trying to do when you're looking for volunteers or you're looking to garner support. You're not. But especially for those folks that are truly stretched thin, like you know all of their names, you know their stories, you know what they're dealing with at home, you know that they've got teenagers and they've got little kids and they've got like they're in the sandwich generation and they're caring for aging parents and their kids, right? I mean, so many different challenges. So when you go to them, you can bring that to them too. Like, how's your mom today? How are you doing? And then start with small things. Many volunteers are incredibly stretched thin already, but the ones that are able to keep consistently doing the small things, when you offer them something else, they often get excited because they're like, yeah, like I really do want to do something. But if they're able to be consistent and they want to keep showing up, people want to be asked and they want to be invited to do more. Again, like I think of my own experience, the way that I got involved into any kind of justice ministry was someone invited me, because I didn't think I was capable of it when I was a young person. I didn't think that I had that skill set. And so when someone said, hey, will you come serve with me at the soup kitchen? I'm like, okay, sure, right? And that was the start of that journey. That was the start of that transformation. So giving that invitation, and don't be afraid of the invitation either. Don't be afraid of getting the no, because it's their prerogative to say no, and it's your prerogative to go and ask them again, like, hey, you want to come do this thing, and if you do so with excitement and with hope, they won't feel bad that you're asking them. They'll be like, thank you for asking me. I can't do it, but maybe this person can, right? So don't be afraid to keep asking. There's nothing wrong with keeping asking. Someone's got to be the one that's asking, and it looks like God's appointed that person to be you, so good on you, and keep asking. It's good.
hope you feel hope and encouragement from that. That was tremendous. Thank you.
I just wanted to affirm that it's not just your perception, it's getting harder. It is getting harder, especially since the pandemic, but over the last decade, our ability to interact with one another has changed, and the opportunities that we have to comfort one another, to be in one another's presence, to do life together, those opportunities have shrunk. There's literature that suggests that we are losing our ability to interact with one another in that way. And so it doesn't just feel like you are the one or two interactions that person had that day. You really are. And we're all starting to feel it. And I just wanted to hold space with you and affirm that you are feeling what we are all feeling in other arenas in our life. And it's one of the key things that we as Christians with buildings and with spaces, it should be our mission to hold our spaces as third spaces. You know what I mean by third spaces? So it's not at work and it's not at home, but it's that other place where you interact with people who you're able to communicate with and check your ideas and your hopes and dreams and fears against another person who doesn't then come home with you and tell you all about them later. Like, that is a thing that we as human beings need, and as a society, we are, through multiple means, narrowing that down, and it's to our detriment. So, a little off topic, but for those of us with building spaces, one of the very best ministries you can do is just to open it up to do something. Have those meetings, have those piano recitals, have whatever it is, just to give people that face-to-face interaction that doesn't have to be about faith necessarily, but just offers people the opportunity to do life together.
Does this mean I can cancel all my Zoom committee meetings?
I would second that.
Yes. But to reinforce and just to give another grounding, pastoral care is a calling that we all respond to care for one another in times of suffering. And that is the question of suffering that we go through every day. Well, what is our hope in that? The hope is really grounded in that we are not alone. And anytime we can spend time together, comfort one another, encourage one another, that is giving us the strength to face another day, to face another ill, to stand up against another injustice.
You'll get the last word.
Thank you. I think, as you've been saying, with the inability to interact with other people and to reach out, one of the key barriers is the inability to forgive others. And I think there's been too much emphasis sometimes on building walls instead of building bridges. And I was wondering what all of you think of how do we go about leading others in forgiving others?
Of us pray some form of this just about every Sunday. My answer to this question is I think forgiveness is hard, and that we're cynical about apologies. I saw a story on the news about a woman who was denied an opportunity to be with her child, a sick child, and so was fired. And the CEO comes on, does a TikTok, because that's what we do now, a TikTok apology, and the response was, well, that wasn't sincere. You didn't really mean that. Do it again. And she did it again. So I think forgiveness is the same way, that forgiveness is a core Christian value, but it means letting go of a debt. It means letting the thing go. Doesn't mean the harm wasn't done. Doesn't mean there aren't consequences to the harm that was done. Doesn't mean that the relationship, it could mean the relationship is broken and can't be repaired. But we don't drag that hurt around with us. And that's really hard to do. Because I I'll forgive, but I won't forget. Well, we're not asked to forget. In fact, we need to remember the harm done to us so that we don't let it happen again, or work very hard not to let it happen again. But forgiveness for me, I'm just speaking for me, there are learned people on this panel who can speak to this, means just, I'm not going to drag that thing you did to me around with me for the rest of my life. I'm going to let it go and go on with my life. Now, doesn't mean you and I will be friends again. Maybe we will. But it means that I have made my peace with it and have let it go. And you may or may not know I forgave you. You know, and I'm just not, you've done no harm to me ever. And so but that, you know, that's forgiveness is work I have to do. So.
As I think about forgiveness, I think about Jesus' last words as he was dying on the cross. That reminds me every day about forgiveness and respect. That's what I think of, and I think that's what we all have to think. If we have faith, and we have to believe in those words.
Next thing, Pastor?
The next thing is dinner, and I've been advised that even if you didn't sign up for a dinner, there's probably a dinner downstairs for you. We've ordered sufficiently. So you're welcome to come downstairs. There's an elevator that will take you downstairs. It's the hall right under here. It goes by the name of Ayler Hall, and you're welcome to do that. And then we will gather after dinner at 7 for worship. So that's what's next on the docket. So thank you very much. I think they're box dinners, so they are ready now, and it's there are tables ready for us downstairs, and we can continue the conversation around smaller tables downstairs. Do I have that right? Other planners, is that right? Yeah, I think we can go right now if you want to, or